Welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast with host Darren Shear, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. This is the show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. You can get more information about HBU's Center for Christianity in Business and sign up to receive free access to all issues of the Christian Business Review Journal by visiting our website at christianityinbusiness.com.
On this episode, we're joined by my friend Christeen Rico. She has over 6 years experience in the tech industry, delivering both digital as well as physical products and programs in new markets. And currently she's focused on bringing Apple's largest products, their retail stores, to new countries. And she successfully launched Apple's retail operations into Mexico, Korea, and Austria. And she most recently has been working on technology initiatives to support the future of Apple retail. I know a lot of our listeners are listening on their iPhones and such, and she just has a passion to really help believers in the workplace to live out their faith in a way that's just attractive to Jesus. And she's also the co-leader of the Apple Christian Fellowship Employee Resource Group. So I know we have a lot of focus on Christian business owners and just kind of leadership in business, but from kind of the mid-level of a massive publicly traded company like Apple or Google or Facebook or one of these companies, Christeen provides very interesting context for us to kind of get some lessons on what does that look like in Silicon Valley in particular, and maybe something that you can learn to apply in your organization. So Christeen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Darren, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what's got up to in Silicon Valley? By the way, did I say it the cool way? Because I heard people saying Silicon Valley, and then it seems like the people who really are in the know say Silicon Valley. Is that right?
Who knows? I mean, I say Silicon Valley.
Okay, that must be right.
What comes off of my lips these days. But again, it's a melting pot here, so you'll hear all kinds of different pronunciations and terms. So
sure.
I will begin by saying it's an exciting time here for many different reasons. I would say one trend that I've personally been excited about is how God is connecting communities of Christians within large companies as well as across companies. And I personally feel like that's been growing more rapidly over the past 3 to 4 years through different ministries that have been growing here in the Bay Area, such as the Faith and Work Movement nonprofit ministry, which was started by a pastor about 4 or 5 years ago. And this pastor actually came to the Bay Area in Mountain View specifically to plant a church. And he quickly realized, being in Mountain View, that his neighbors included the residential area on one side and then Google. And he started to pray for the community around him, and including Google. And pretty soon he met a believer who worked at Google and just started to meet with this individual. And pretty soon, the Christian who was working at Google introduced him to other believers from other companies, like LinkedIn and Apple and others. And this pastor, then had this growing list of believers and figured, hey, it's great that I'm meeting them, but they should really meet each other. And one of the things that he did was started to host a really simple thing, a workplace worship night. And just to bring together these believers from the different companies on, a Friday night or a weekend evening at a local venue. And it was just a time for Christians from different companies to worship together, to pray together, to meet one another, and to grow in friendship. And I was one of the first attendees of these workplace worship nights back in 2015. And, fast forward 4 years or so later, and I've become really good friends with folks from the different companies that I've met through these events, and have seen a growth in attendance as well as representation of organizations. And God is continuing to move these communities of Christians toward bigger impact, including, actually next month at the end of June, a group of us, colleagues of mine from Google and other companies we're invited to attend the Global Workplace Forum in Manila. And we'll be sharing a bit about our story and what God is doing in our context to help energize the global workplace movement.
Yeah, that's so awesome. By the way, what pastor and what church is that?
So you can learn more about this ministry on faithandworkmovement.org. That's probably the best way to find out about it. I would spell that all out, faithandworkmovement.org.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And because there's one pastor, his name is Andy. I don't know if that's the same one you're talking about.
Nope, Pastor Roy.
Oh, Pastor Roy. Okay.
Yeah.
I had heard about a couple of different pastors going out there and really seeking to make an impact, and I'm sure there are more, but thank God for this ministry that's been rallying together other like-minded believers from other companies there in Silicon Valley, because we're talking a lot of people that are just, they're humans and they need Jesus. So tell us about.
And I think.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to add, I think too, in a place like Silicon Valley, it can feel very lonely to be a Christian in your workplace, especially in a large tech company. Often feedback that I hear and have personally experienced as well is this sense that you're, this feeling of, oh, am I the only Christian around here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what these communities, these events, fellowship nights, Christian employee resource groups, etc., have been fostering is a sense of community amongst Christians, and really encouraging people and reminding them that they are not alone.
Yeah.
And when that is unlocked, then you begin to pay more attention to where the Holy Spirit is working, and it creates an opportunity to operate differently throughout the day when suddenly you realize, God is at work here. I am not alone. I'm here for a bigger reason than myself. So that's been really cool.
Indeed. And our listeners who've listened to this podcast for a while they've probably heard me tell the story of when I was leaving the Air Force base and going over those railroad tracks, and the Lord spoke to me and said, this base is your ministry. Well, something I haven't shared was I kind of had that same complex where I thought that I kind of felt lonely. I felt like I was the only Christian, and it's almost kind of an arrogant kind of way to approach your workplace. And the Lord spoke to me through the book of Acts, where Paul comes into Corinth, which was a very heathen place, even in those days. Paul was very afraid because he felt so lonely. And the Lord spoke to him. It's there in the red letters in the book of Acts. I want to say it's like Acts chapter 18, where he says, do not be afraid, for I have many in this place. And that was really a paradigm shift for me in the Air Force, which I'm sure in some ways not unlike working in a big publicly traded company like Apple, that if we will just ask God to connect us with other believers, he might bring a Christeen along our path. And what's that experience been like for you? Like, how did you go from kind of feeling in that lonely place to kind of first starting to connect with some Christians in your workplace?
Great question, Darren. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit and share. I grew up in a Christian family and, was one of those kids that was taught to memorize Bible verses like John 3:16 and, of course, Ephesians 6:1, children obey your parents in the Lord.
Oh, yeah.
This is right. Starting at the age of 2, right? I thankfully, through my family and the ministry of my local church, was able to develop a personal relationship with Jesus at age 7 and received the gospel then and made the decision to be baptized at 11. And then I went to college and, God really showed up for me in new ways then as well. I think for the first time I started to ask questions like, why do I believe what I believe? And is God's love really real? Because when I evaluated my life at that time, at 18 or 19, I really started to think deeply about what did I think about? What did I really spend my time on? Who was I really spending my time with? As I did a bit of an audit of my thoughts and time and priorities. And I started to realize, it just didn't add up. This love that I professed for God was not manifesting in these areas of my life. And so that led me to pray. And I started to ask God at that time, like, God, would you reveal your love to me in a way that's tangible so that it materially impacts the way that I live my life every day? And I started to ask as well, like, God, would you teach me how to love you? And in that process, God really answered. He, I won't go into all the details, but he brought people into my life that showed his love to me in very tangible ways that there was no logical reason for it except that they loved God. And then at the same time, he brought me to his word. And I think it's in John 14, when Jesus puts it very simply that, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a bit eye-opening. And I started to ask myself, do I know Jesus' commandments? So I started digging into the Bible, and Jesus thankfully makes things pretty simple, right? He's asked, what are the greatest commandments? And he answers very, very simply, to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And he commands his disciples to love one another so that others would know that we're really his disciples. And so clinging on to those things, I've just continued to ask God, what does it look like for me to be in pursuit of obedience to these things that are not optional? Because these are commands. So as a Christian, they're not optional for me. What does it look like for me to intentionally pursue obedience to those things every moment of every day, including where I spend the majority of my time? Yeah. Which happens to be, in a large publicly traded company. I will say, coming out of college, because I started my career in management consulting for a large firm and was doing strategy and operations consulting work for other high-tech companies here in Silicon Valley and beyond as well. And I will say that I had more trouble figuring out what this all looks like. An example, I didn't know as a new college grad, entering the workforce, being put in these meetings, going on travel engagements, etc. Like I didn't know, was I allowed to pray? Like, could I say that I went to church on Sunday? Would that be okay? Is that going to impact how, people are going to review me or think my competence, etc.? So I remember coming out of college and being a bit more unsure about how to navigate, living out my faith practically in the workplace. And, but I learned, and, through the help of different leaders in my life, I started to grow in my confidence and in my sense of identity of that I am a daughter of the Most High King through Jesus Christ. That's who I am, no matter where I am.
Yeah, right.
And it was that realization, I think it started to solidify more as I got older, as I got more experience, as I got deeper into the Word. And so when I got the opportunity to join Apple a few years ago, I made a very intentional decision that this was going to be my opportunity to be consistent, to be who God says I am, no matter where I am from day one.
Right.
And so for me, that was a pretty intentional choice and decision because of my experience at my prior company, kind of navigating through that. And so an example of this is, I remember on my first day at Apple, we go through this new employee orientation half-day thing, and then your manager or folks from your team usually pick you up after the new employee onboarding, and then you go to lunch together. And I remember that first day, and I went to lunch with my team, and they're great. And one of the first things that they said to me was, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. We curse a lot." And I said, "No, I mean, I don't mind. I personally, prefer not to, but I'm not gonna police your language or anything like that." So I just said, "No, I don't mind." But then I also added, and I said, this is as we were sitting down for lunch, I also added, and I said, "Well, I hope you don't mind. I pray before I eat." And they kind of just laughed at me, but they said, "Yeah, we don't mind. That's fine." And so I prayed before I ate. And so that was my very first day at Apple. And that really, I think, set the tone for me on how I wanted to be. I wanted to be consistent in my identity in Christ and live that out practically, even if it were to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I'm sure that some of our listeners that are working in large companies like that, where they feel that loneliness that you described a little bit earlier. And I know I experienced a lot of that in the Air Force, especially early on. And so a lot of it was because I felt like there were no other Christians there. And I felt like it was just kind of me against the world, which again is just not like, first of all, you and God is a majority. And then in a place, especially a company in America, there are going to be Christians in that company. Like, that's just the reality of it. There was a lot of profanity. I mean, profanity, it sounds like something that, okay, we're in 2019, like, stop being prudish and get over yourself. But how did you deal with that? I mean, at what point did you start to come in contact with other believers who shared your values?
Great question. And that's where, to my surprise, I had found the diversity and inclusion, in internal website at work. And I found a link to the Apple Christian Fellowship Employee Resource Group page. And my jaw kind of dropped at that point because that didn't exist at the prior company that I was a part of. And so I was just ecstatic that this existed. And I plugged in to one of the small groups that was meeting near my office location. And so I was able to immediately plug in with other believers through the existence of the Apple Christian Fellowship Employee Resource Group.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit blessed and unique in that way.
Yeah. What is the perception of this group kind of among people that are not a part of it across the Apple campus, would you say?
I mean, Apple has over 120,000 employees across multiple countries. Or it's really hard for me to make a general statement on what the perception is, but I will say that I am overall grateful of the focus that Apple does have around inclusion and diversity. And so it's been a blessing to just be a part of that program and that overall focus. And, you know, there are a lot of things that I've been grateful that we've been able to do, like internal large events and activities that I realize, you know, not everyone is able to be supported to do, but with our focus on inclusion and diversity and the belief, and that comes from the very top, really.
Yeah.
With our CEO being vocal about it, and we have a new, we have leaders that are being very vocal about it, and so that has definitely helped. Create belonging and visibility for groups like the Apple Christian Fellowship.
Right. Well, you know, there is a perception in America right now that diversity and inclusion kind of means everyone except Christians. Have you ever had a sense of that, or is that just because it sounds almost kind of utopian there?
Personally, I will say that, I mean, it can definitely be a challenge to be vocal about your faith. I do think in general, in the San Francisco Bay Area, as one of the least churched and least religious places in the world, in general, it is a challenge to be vocal about your Christian faith. I think Christianity in a lot of ways has a branding problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where, and this isn't unique to I think this community. I'm sure many Christians in other parts of the world might experience it, or other parts of the U.S. certainly would experience this. And, you know, there is this branding problem, I think, that we face, that when you say or you come out as a Christian, there are these assumptions about your political stance, and your beliefs around gender, etc., which may cause people to not be as open to you.
Yeah. Is that okay? What do you think in a place like Apple? Is it okay to take that approach?
I think personally, I go back to what I am commanded to do, and that's to love my neighbor as myself. Personally, I recognize that I have blind spots in terms of my understanding of people of different experiences, different lifestyles than me. And so for me, instead of pulling away from that, I tend to lean in and seek to understand, seek to get uncomfortable. And an example of that is, I have a blind spot just because I didn't grow up knowing anyone who identified as transgender, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, again, it's an identity and experience that is new for me, and even now. However, at work, I get a chance to work alongside people with different experiences like that and learn more about them as people and grow an understanding and have conversations. And in turn, they ask questions about me and who I am and what I believe and why I do what I do. And it, for me personally, has deepened my empathy and understanding and friendship with folks that are different from me. And I think, and I know for some Christian groups that might feel controversial, but again, with the goal of creating inclusion and belonging for everyone, I see it as part of my opportunity, being a co-leader of a Christian employee resource group in a large company, to play a role in loving others and being an agent of creating belonging and inclusion for them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it certainly is. I mean, we're not going to get very far in terms of representing Jesus accurately if we're not understanding, or at least seeking to understand people. I think it's one of those Dale Carnegie principles: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so without taking the time or removing some of those barriers that prevent us from being able to walk across the room and find out kind of where somebody's coming from, there's not going to be any open dialogue. There's not, and because people either want what we have or they don't. They either see our lifestyle as attractive or they don't. And a lot of that just comes down to how and Jesus is very attractive. I mean, like when you really just get to know him, and when somebody has an opportunity to get to know you, as they do in the workplace, I mean, like no other outside of our family unit at home, I mean, there's no other place where we're going to be known, not even in our local churches on Sunday morning. I mean, that's where we become known in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately, for me, living out my faith in the workplace is multidimensional. Mm-hmm. God has been teaching me to expand my view of success. I think growing up in the context that I grew up in, and in our culture, like we have this really interesting work culture, right? That's focused on the outcome or the project, the result. What's the tangible metric that comes out of this, right? Mm-hmm. And there's that overemphasis on the outcome or the work itself, which I do believe is important to God. I mean, we can talk on and on about theology of work, but I do believe work matters to God. So I think that's great. And I think we can grow more like Jesus in and through that work output. But in addition to that, I also think about how am I growing more like Jesus in my character? Mm-hmm. in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, like throughout the day, in my thoughts and my speech and the way that I go about my work. How am I growing like Jesus in my character? And then also, how am I growing more like Jesus in my relationships? Right? I think about Philippians 2, and the Word of God says to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but to consider, not only my interest, but the interest of others. And it goes on to talk about the example of Jesus, who, willingly surrendered himself to the will of the Father, even unto death.
Yeah.
And I, practically, as I seek to pursue obedience to Jesus in my workplace, I ask myself, am I growing in love for my coworkers? And what does that look like? Am I, what are my motivations here throughout the day? And again, I fail at this every day, I'm sure, but it's that constant pursuit of growing more like Jesus in my character, in my relationships, as well as in the quality of my work, and trying to maintain a more holistic view of those things is part of my daily pursuit and how I want to envision success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what would be, you're about to, in about a week's time from the recording of this interview, you are about to host a work and faith workshop to help folks from all across Silicon Valley, Facebook, Google, Apple, kind of learn how to start a employee resource group, a faith-based employee resource group. For those who are not able to make it to that event, what would be your advice for someone wanting to start something like this at their own company that maybe is not, as some of the CEOs we've had come talk on this show have, they work for CEOs that are not like that are not necessarily open to this kind of thing. What would be your advice for people in those situations?
Yes. Well, first, I invite people to learn more on our website, workandfaithworkshop.com. That's a place they can learn. And there's also a national Christian employee resource group network that has been meeting for years. And that's another avenue where folks from different parts of the country that are not here in the Bay Area can connect locally with other believers who are stewarding these types of communities in their companies. I would also add that if you are out there and you're working for a company and you don't have a formal faith-based employee resource group and you're feeling alone, I would invite you to continue to pray that God would bring you in touch with at least one other believer in your workplace. And there are ways to do that, whether that's leveraging internal communication tools. For example, I have an example of a friend who, messaged in an internal company Slack channel, "Are there any Christians here?" And see what happens. And the other option is to reach out to your local church. And say, "Hey, I work at this company. Anyone else work there?" I know I have gotten connected with other folks, through that kind of outreach, and I know others have as well. And so, and I would say, start with something. The journey toward a faith-based employee resource group is a unique one, and it does not always happen overnight. But that does not mean you can't start somewhere. And maybe that just means, if you do get in touch with another believer, you start meeting at lunch and you talk and you pray together.
Yeah.
And see what God does there. And I assure you, He will reveal in time as you pray and you meet together consistently. He will reveal in time what the right next steps are and when to pursue them. Yeah.
Yeah, because bringing your faith into the workplace, living your faith out in the workplace is not individual just an individual thing. It's not about just being a Christian in the marketplace. It's really about being the church in the workplace, and because it's a team sport, and you have to have other believers. I mean, if you don't have another believer, you better go make one. Lead somebody to Christ, because you're going to need that support, and because that's really what God has in mind, is not just about being a superhero Christian that's the only Christian around, but no, he's looking to gather his people, and like he said to Paul, and if there were Christians when Paul came into Corinth, I mean, just a few years after Jesus rose again, I mean, there are definitely Christians in your area. So
yeah, and I will say, I find it, on average, it is difficult sometimes for Christians to talk about work at church.
Yeah.
So, I would say take that step and seek intentional prayer support from your church community if you haven't already. And, push your, local church communities to help you connect with other believers at your company, because sure enough, they're probably going to church somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, workinfaithworkshop.com is the website. Christeen, thank you so much for taking the time out of your work day. I know you're getting to work from home today, which is awesome. But we sure have been encouraged, and may God continue to bless your ministry. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity in Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU Center for Christianity in Business at christianityinbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep integrating biblical values into your business.